The stars above Earth had always been silent. For thousands of years, humanity looked up and wondered if they were alone. On the morning of March 15th, 2147, they got their answer. 200 massive ships appeared in orbit, each one larger than any city on Earth. They blocked out the sun over half the planet, casting shadows that stretched across entire continents. They had arrived. They were tall creatures, standing nearly 3 meters high, with hard shells covering their bodies like armor made of bone. Their eyes were black and cold, like deep holes that reflected nothing. For 10,000 years they had ruled their part of the galaxy. They had conquered 47 species before humans. To them, the universe was simple. There were and there were slaves, nothing else. High Sovereign stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked down at the blue planet below. He had done this many times before. Every species reacted the same way. First came fear. Then came desperate attempts to fight. Then came surrender. It was always the same, and it was always boring. He ordered his communications officer to send the message. Every screen on Earth, every radio, every device that could receive a signal suddenly showed the same thing. The face of filled the world. Creatures of this world, his voice was cold and flat, translated into every human language. I am High Sovereign of the Dominion. Your planet now belongs to us. You have 72 hours to accept the Treaty of Submission. Sign it and you will live as servants of the Dominion. Refuse and your cities will burn. Your oceans will boil. Your species will become ash and memory. Choose. The transmission ended. Panic spread across Earth like fire. The United Earth Council gathered within hours. Presidents and prime ministers, generals and admirals, scientists and diplomats all crowded into the emergency bunker beneath Geneva. They argued and shouted and blamed each other. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to run. Some simply sat in silence, too shocked to speak. Admiral stood in the corner and watched. He was 62 years old, with gray hair and scars from 3 different wars. He had spent his life studying military strategy, learning from every battle in human history. Now he studied something new. He studied the message, watching it over and over on his tablet. Doctor sat beside him. She was younger, maybe 40, with dark eyes that never seemed to rest. She had spent 20 years studying the possibility of alien contact. Now that it had happened, she felt strangely calm. "They're arrogant," she said quietly, not looking up from her own tablet. Glanced at her, obviously. "No, you don't understand." Pulled up data on her screen. "I've been analyzing their language patterns, their body language, the design of their ships. Everything about them screams supreme confidence. They don't just think they're better than us. They cannot imagine any other possibility." "That's because they've won 47 times," replied. "That much winning makes anyone confident." "Confident, yes, but also blind." Finally looked at him. "They've never fought anyone who truly resisted. Every species they conquered either fought openly and lost quickly or surrendered immediately. They've never seen anything different." Was quiet for a long moment. On the main floor below them, the council was voting. The vote was clear. Earth would surrender. There was no other choice. The fleet could glass the entire planet in hours. Humanity's small space force was nothing compared to those massive warships. "What are you thinking?" asked. Smiled. It was not a nice smile. "I'm thinking that we've spent 10,000 years fighting each other. We've developed every kind of warfare imaginable. We've learned to be patient. We've learned to hide. We've learned to wait for the perfect moment to strike." He turned to face her fully. "They have never met a species like us. They don't know what we're capable of." "You want to resist. The council just voted to surrender." "No," said softly. "I want to surrender too. I want to sign their treaty. I want to smile and bow and call them master. I want them to think they've won." His eyes were hard now, like stones. "And then I want to learn everything about them, their technology, their weaknesses, their blind spots. I want to spend years being the perfect slave. And when the time is right, when we know everything we need to know, when they've forgotten to be afraid of us." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Stared at him for a long time. She thought about her daughter, only 12 years old. She thought about the kind of life her daughter would have under rule. She thought about what it would mean to pretend to be broken while secretly preparing for war. That could take years, she said. Decades, maybe. Yes. Millions of people would suffer, would die, would never know what we were planning. Yes. You're asking humanity to play the longest game in history. Nodded slowly. I'm asking humanity to do what we've always done. Survive, adapt, wait. And when our enemies forget to watch us, we remind them why they should have been afraid. 2 days later, Earth signed the Treaty of Submission. High Sovereign watched the ceremony from his ship, satisfaction glowing in his cold eyes. Another species conquered. Another world added to the Dominion. The humans knelt before his representatives, their heads bowed, their voices quiet as they pledged eternal service. It was so easy. It was always so easy. Ordered his fleet to begin the occupation. Troops landed in every major city. Factories were seized. Resources were claimed. Humans were sorted into categories: workers, servants, specialists, all useful, all properly submissive. He watched the reports come in. The humans were cooperating perfectly. No resistance, no secret attacks, no hidden weapons. They simply accepted their fate like every other species before them. Felt pleased. His advisors congratulated him on another successful conquest. The Dominion celebrated. Songs were written about the great High Sovereign who had claimed another world for the Empire. None of them noticed the way certain humans looked at each other when they weren't watching. None of them saw the small nods, the tiny signals, the silent promises passed between strangers. None of them understood what it meant when a human smiled. They would learn. In time, they would all learn. But by then, it would be far too late. 3 years passed under rule. Earth changed. The great cities still stood, but now they served new masters. Factories that once built cars and computers now produced materials for the Dominion. Farms that once fed human families now grew food for soldiers. Everywhere the masters walked freely, and everywhere the humans bowed. They installed neural compliance collars on important humans, politicians, military leaders, scientists, anyone who might cause trouble. The collars were simple but effective. They sent signals directly into the brain: pain for disobedience, calm for compliance. They had used them on dozens of species. They always worked. Admiral wore a collar now. He served aboard a mining vessel, just another broken human doing whatever his masters commanded. He cleaned floors. He carried equipment. He kept his eyes down and his mouth shut. They barely noticed him. He was old, gray, and beaten, just another slave. But every night when they slept, walked the ship. He memorized every corridor. He counted every weapon. He studied every system. He noted which guards were lazy. He learned which officers were cruel. He remembered everything. On Earth, Doctor also wore a collar. She worked in a science facility, translating human research for her masters. They wanted to understand human medicine, human engineering, human biology. Gave them what they asked for. She smiled and obeyed and never complained. But she also watched. She watched how they treated their technology. She noticed how careless they were, how confident. They never imagined that a slave might be smart enough to understand their systems. They never considered that a human scientist might secretly study the very collar around her own neck. Doctor worked with. She was a neuroscientist, quiet and patient, with steady hands and sharper eyes. For 2 years, she studied the compliance collars in secret. She took notes in a code only she understood. She ran experiments late at night when no one watched. On the day she finally understood how the collars worked, she did not celebrate. She simply nodded to herself and continued her work. They had designed the collars for species that accepted defeat, species that stopped fighting when they lost. The collars were not built for minds that never stopped resisting, even when they pretended to surrender. Found the flaw. She told no one, not yet. She waited. Across the galaxy, humans spread. They used them as labor everywhere. They were strong workers, adaptable, easy to train. Human slaves soon worked in shipyards and mines, in factories and farms on 1,000 different worlds. The Dominion congratulated itself on finding such useful servants. They did not notice the networks forming. It started simply. A word passed between workers, a signal hidden in a song, a message carved into a wall in a place only humans would look. Slowly, carefully, the scattered humans began to find each other. They built connections across star systems. They shared information. They remembered. On mining station Theta 7 at the edge of Dominion space, 300 humans worked in the deep tunnels. They dug precious metals from rock. They breathed dust and darkness. Many of them died from the brutal conditions. They did not care. Slaves were replaceable. One day, an overseer named Al grew angry at a young boy who worked too slowly. The boy was only 11 years old. His name was David. His crime was stopping to cough, his lungs filled with mining dust. Al beat him. He beat him for a long time while the other humans watched with empty eyes. When it was over, David was dead. That night, the humans of Theta 7 said nothing. They ate their thin meal. They went to their bunks. They slept. But they did not really sleep. In the morning, 200 overseers on the station were dead. They died in their beds, in their offices, in their private quarters. They died without a sound, without a struggle. The security systems showed nothing. The cameras recorded nothing. The humans claimed they knew nothing. The Dominion investigated. They found no evidence. They questioned the humans, but the humans only stared with dull eyes and gave useless answers. It was impossible. Slaves did not kill masters. It had never happened, not in 10,000 years. The Dominion increased security. They added more guards. They installed more cameras. They punished random humans to discourage further resistance. 1 month later, it happened again. Different station, same result. Dead, no evidence, humans knew nothing. Then again and again. High Sovereign received the reports in his palace. His advisors had no explanation. They suggested it might be a disease, or faulty equipment, or perhaps other aliens secretly attacking Dominion interests. No one suggested the humans were responsible. That was impossible. Everyone knew it was impossible. Read the reports again. He studied the patterns. He noticed something strange. In every case, the human work productivity increased after the incidents. The humans worked harder. They met every quota. They exceeded expectations. His advisors called this good news. They said the humans were finally learning proper submission. They said the increased security was working. Said nothing. But late at night, alone in his chambers, he felt something he had never felt before. A cold sensation in his chest, a tightness in his thoughts. He could not name it. Millions of light years away, in a dirty cell on mining station Theta 7, an old human woman sang a quiet song. It was a lullaby, one humans had sung to their children for centuries. The words were simple and soft. But if could have heard it, if he could have understood what it truly meant, he would have learned the name for what he felt. It was fear, and he was right to feel it. In the deepest tunnels of 100 worlds, in the shadows of 1,000 ships, in the silent corners of the great Dominion itself, humanity was waking up. They smiled at their masters. They obeyed every order. They never openly resisted. But in their hearts they remembered David. They remembered every child beaten, every family torn apart, every life destroyed. They remembered and they waited. The thought time was on their side. They had ruled for 10,000 years. They would rule for 10,000 more. They did not understand. Time was not their weapon. It was humanity's. 5 years after the invasion, humanity had spread across the Dominion like water seeping through cracks in stone. Over 2 billion humans now lived and worked on alien worlds. They served in homes, cooking meals and cleaning floors. They built ships in massive orbital factories. They farmed alien crops on distant planets. They were everywhere, doing everything, noticed by no one. This was exactly what the Resistance wanted. The network had grown beyond anything the early planners imagined. What started as whispers between workers had become a galaxy-spanning web of secrets. Messages traveled through channels the never thought to monitor, a pattern in how crates were stacked, a rhythm in how tools were used, a song hummed while working. Humans found 1,000 ways to communicate that their masters could not see. On a hidden asteroid base, far from any patrol route, the leaders of the Resistance met for the first time in person. Admiral arrived first. His hair was completely white now, and new scars marked his face. But his eyes were sharp, and when he walked, he moved like a man half his age. Years of pretending to be broken had not broken him. Came next. She was thinner than before, harder. The woman who had once been a scholar now carried herself like a soldier. She had watched too many friends die. She had learned too much about cruelty. The softness in her was gone. Brought the most important gift. After 5 years of secret work, she had done more than understand the compliance collars. She had built a way to disable them. A signal, broadcast at the right frequency, would shut down every collar in range. They would never see it coming. Others came too, engineers who had spent years mapping ship designs, hackers who had quietly infiltrated Dominion computer networks, soldiers who had hidden their training while pretending to be simple workers. Each brought knowledge, each brought rage, each brought hope. Stood before them all and spoke simply. 5 years ago, I asked humanity to do something terrible. I asked us to pretend to be slaves while our people suffered. I asked us to smile at monsters while they hurt our children. I asked us to wait. He paused. The room was silent. The waiting is almost over. They spent 3 days planning. They had gathered so much information over the years: ship locations, defense networks, guard rotations, weaknesses in every system they used. Humans had built and maintained all of it. Humans knew how it all worked. Humans knew how to break it. But as they planned, tragedy struck. A message arrived from a nobleman named had held a celebration for his allies. For entertainment, he had executed 100 human slaves in front of his guests. He had made it slow. He had made it painful. He had laughed while they died. Among the dead was a young woman named Sarah. She was Admiral's daughter. The room fell silent when the message was read. All eyes turned to the old Admiral. His face showed nothing. His hands did not shake. He simply stood there, still as stone, for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. How long until we're ready? 3 months, answered. Maybe 2 if we push. Nodded slowly. Then we push. The Resistance had always planned to wait for the perfect moment, to be patient, to be careful. Sarah's death changed nothing about the strategy, but it changed everything about the determination behind it. The message went out through the network. Every human in the galaxy received it within 6 hours. They learned what had happened. They learned what was coming. They learned what they needed to do. On 1,000 worlds, humans continued their work. They smiled at their masters. They obeyed every command. They gave no sign that anything had changed. But in their hearts, a fire was burning, a fire that had been building for 5 years, a fire that could not be stopped. Stood alone in the planning room after the others had left. She stared at a map of the galaxy, at all the points marking human presence throughout the Dominion. So many people, so many lives, so many who would die in what was coming. Found her there hours later. He stood beside her without speaking. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" she asked. "Every day. So many will die, our people, their people, maybe millions on both sides." Was quiet for a moment. "When I was a young officer, I studied every war in human history. You know what I learned? I learned that sometimes there are no good choices. Sometimes you can only choose between terrible and worse. We could accept slavery. We could let our children grow up in chains and their children after them forever. Or we could fight and bleed and die for the chance of something better. And if we lose, then at least we die on our feet. He turned to face her. But we won't lose, you know why. Shook her head. Because they still don't understand what they're facing. They've conquered 47 species. Every single one of them, when they lost their first battle, they gave up. They accepted defeat. They stopped fighting. Eyes were hard. Humans don't do that. We lost our first battle 5 years ago. We've been fighting ever since. We just fight differently. We fight with patience. We fight with secrets. We fight with smiles that hide knives. And when we finally strike, we don't stop until it's over. He walked to the door, then paused. Tell everyone 2 months. We move in 2 months, and tell them to remember Sarah. Remember every child we've lost. Remember everything they've done to us. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. And when the day comes, show them no mercy, because they showed us none. The door closed behind him, stood alone with the map and the weight of what was coming. 2 months. After 5 years of suffering, only 2 months remained. Somewhere in the galaxy, High Sovereign slept peacefully in his palace, dreaming of 10,000 more years of dominion rule. He had no idea that his empire was already dead. It just hadn't fallen yet. The day began like any other across the dominion. Masters woke to find their servants already working. Breakfast was prepared. Floors were clean. Ships were maintained. Everything was normal. Everything was peaceful. At exactly 600 Galactic Standard Time, everything changed. It started with the collars. Across 1,000 worlds at the exact same moment, every neural compliance collar simply stopped working. 2 billion humans felt the constant pressure in their minds vanish. For the first time in years, they were free to think, free to feel, free to act. They noticed immediately. Alarms began to sound in control centers everywhere. Something was wrong with the slave control systems. Engineers rushed to fix the problem. They never got the chance. The viruses that human hackers had planted years ago activated at the same moment. Dominion military networks crashed. Communication systems failed. Defense grids went dark. Automated weapons turned against their owners. Doors that should have been locked swung open. Doors that should have been opened slammed shut. On Earth, the orbital bombardment platforms that had threatened humanity for 5 years suddenly changed their targeting. Their massive guns, designed to destroy cities, turned toward the fleet still stationed in orbit. The commanders had only seconds to feel confusion before their ships exploded around them. In the great shipyards above a dozen worlds, human workers revealed weapons they had hidden for years. Guns assembled piece by piece. Explosives made from common materials. Blades forged in secret. The guards died before they understood what was happening. On the itself, in the capital city, in the heart of the empire, human servants opened the palace gates from the inside. For years, they had been trusted to cook food, clean rooms, and serve drinks. No one had imagined they were also memorizing guard positions, stealing access codes, and waiting for this moment. Admiral led the assault on the palace personally. He was 70 years old now, too old for frontline combat. He did not care. He had waited 5 years for this. He would see it through. The fighting was brutal. They were not weak. They were larger than humans, stronger, covered in natural armor. Their weapons were advanced. Their soldiers were trained. In a fair fight, they would have won easily. But this was not a fair fight. Humans attacked from everywhere, from inside and outside, from above and below. They used every trick they had learned in 10,000 years of fighting each other. Ambushes, traps, deception, sacrifice. They had never faced anything like it. Their defenses were designed for external threats. They had never imagined the enemy was already inside. The other slave species watched what was happening. For 10,000 years they had accepted rule. They had believed resistance was impossible. Now they saw humans fighting, humans winning, humans refusing to stop no matter what. They rose too. On 47 worlds, species that had been broken for generations suddenly remembered how to resist. They did not have plans like the humans. They did not have networks or hidden weapons, but they had numbers. They had rage. And they had hope, something they had stolen from them long ago. The Dominion was burning from within. Fought his way through the palace, stepping over bodies. His soldiers moved with him, a mix of young fighters and old survivors. Many fell. They did not stop. They could not stop. Not now. They found the throne room doors sealed and guarded by the High Sovereign's personal guards, the best warriors in the Dominion, elite soldiers who had never known defeat. They lasted 4 minutes. Pushed open the doors himself. The throne room was vast and empty. Golden walls stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. At the far end, on a throne made of black stone, sat High Sovereign. He was alone, his guards were dead, his empire was falling, his communications were silent. For the first time in his long life, he had no power at all. Walked slowly across the room. His boots echoed on the stone floor. He stopped 10 meters from the throne and looked up at the creature who had enslaved his world. Spoke first. His voice was calm, almost curious. How? You are primitive, weak, divided. Your species fights itself constantly. How did you do this? Smiled. It was the same smile he had worn for 5 years. The smile of a slave. The smile that hid everything. You just answered your own question, he said. We fight ourselves constantly. We've been practicing war since before your empire existed. We know every kind of battle. We know how to lose and keep fighting. We know how to wait. We know how to hide. We know how to hate. He took a step closer. You thought our divisions made us weak. You were wrong. They made us strong. They made us creative. They made us impossible to predict. Stared at him. The cold eyes showed something new now, understanding too late. And when you gave us a common enemy, continued, when you hurt our children and enslaved our families, you did something no human leader ever managed. You united us, all of us. Every nation, every culture, every group that ever fought each other. You made us one people. He shook his head slowly. You should have killed us all when you had the chance. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. The Dominion forces were surrendering across the planet. Across the galaxy, the story was the same. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years was falling in a single day. Looked at the High Sovereign for a long moment. He thought about Sarah. He thought about every human who had died in the mines, in the camps, in the homes of cruel masters. He thought about 5 years of smiling at monsters. His hand moved to his weapon. Then he stopped. No, he said quietly, that would be too easy. He turned and walked away. What are you doing? Called after him. Kill me, end it. Paused at the door. You conquered 47 species. You destroyed countless lives. Death is mercy you don't deserve. He looked back one final time. You're going to live. You're going to watch your empire crumble. You're going to see every species you enslaved become free. And you're going to understand finally what you did to us. That's your punishment, understanding. The doors closed behind him. Outside, the sun was rising over a free world. The first free day in 5 years. Stood on the palace steps and watched his people celebrate. The war was not over. There was still fighting across the galaxy. There would be months of hard work ahead, but the impossible had happened. Humanity had won. 2 years had passed since Liberation Day. The galaxy was different now. The Great Dominion, which had ruled for 10,000 years, existed only in history books. Its fleets were scattered. Its armies were broken. Its leaders faced justice for their crimes. But victory had brought new problems. The collapse of the Dominion left chaos behind. Thousands of star systems had no government. Warlords and pirates filled the empty spaces. Old enemies saw opportunities for conquest. The galaxy that had been ordered by tyranny now trembled on the edge of something worse. And everyone looked to humanity. The 47 species that had been slaves alongside humans remembered who had led the rebellion. They remembered who had planned and fought and bled for freedom. When they needed guidance, they turned to the species that had done the impossible. Stood at the center of this storm, she had never wanted to be a leader. She had been a scholar once, a scientist who studied alien cultures. Now she was president of the United Human Confederation, and the weight of a galaxy rested on her shoulders. The choice before her was simple. Humanity could become the new masters. They had the power. They had the knowledge. They had proven themselves stronger than no one would stop them if they chose to rule. Some humans wanted exactly that. They had suffered too much to show mercy. They wanted revenge. They wanted control. They wanted to make sure no species ever threatened humanity again. Understood their anger, she shared it, but she knew where that path led. She proposed something different, the Covenant of Free Peoples, an alliance built not on power but on a promise. Every species would be equal, every species would be free. No one would ever be enslaved again, not by anyone, not even by humans. The debate was long and painful. Many argued that trust was impossible after so much suffering. Many pointed out that the galaxy was dangerous, that only strength mattered, that kindness was weakness. Admiral spoke last at the Great Assembly. He was old now, past 70, and he walked slowly to the platform. His voice was quiet, but everyone listened. "I have spent my whole life studying war," he said. "I know what power can do. I know what fear can make people accept. I know how easy it is to become the monster you fight." He paused, looking across the gathered representatives of 100 species. "We could rule this galaxy. We earned that right with blood and sacrifice. But then what? In 100 years, in 1,000 years, some other species would rise against us. They would fight the same fight we fought. The cycle would continue forever." He shook his head slowly. "I'm tired of cycles. I'm tired of revenge. I didn't spend 5 years as a slave so that I could become masters. I did it so they could be free. Real freedom means everyone is free, or no one is." The covenant passed, not unanimously, not easily, but it passed. The survivors faced trial for their crimes. Many had expected execution, mass death, the complete destruction of their species. It was what they deserved. It was what they would have done. Instead, they faced something far more difficult. They were shown the truth. Every who had held power was forced to sit and listen. They heard testimony from every species they had conquered. They saw images of the suffering they had caused. They learned the names of children who had died in their minds. They watched recordings of families torn apart by their orders. High Sovereign sat through every moment. He could not look away. He was not allowed to look away. Day after day, week after week, the evidence continued. The full weight of 10,000 years of cruelty. Some broke. They could not accept what they saw. They refused to believe they had been monsters. Others changed. Slowly, painfully, they began to understand. They began to feel something their species had never valued. Shame, guilt, responsibility was among them. When his trial ended, he was not executed. He was sentenced to spend his remaining years teaching young about what their empire had done. He accepted this punishment. He understood it. Other galactic powers watched all of this with amazement. They had stayed neutral during the war. They had expected humanity to become conquerors. They had prepared to deal with new tyrants. Instead, they saw something unprecedented. A species that won a war and chose not to dominate. A species that could have taken revenge and chose justice instead. A species that could have become gods and chose to remain human. 10 years passed. On Earth, on a hill overlooking the city where the resistance had begun, a memorial stood. A simple wall of white stone, stretching for kilometers. On it were carved 800 million names. Every human who had died during the occupation and liberation. Admiral, now very old, visited the wall often. He would walk slowly along its length, reading names. Some he recognized. Many he did not. All of them mattered. One day, a young approached him. She was small for her kind, barely 2 meters tall. A student, part of an exchange program that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. She stood beside him in nervous silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I don't understand something." Glanced at her. "What?" "You could have destroyed us. You had every reason to. We did terrible things to your people. We killed millions. We enslaved billions. We showed no mercy." Her voice trembled slightly. "Why didn't you destroy us?" Was quiet for a long time. He looked at the wall, at the endless names carved into stone. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the mining stations and the labor camps and the years of suffering. He thought about all the rage he had carried for so long. "Because then we would become you," he finally said. "We would become the monsters. We would teach the galaxy that cruelty is strength, that power is all that matters, that the way to solve problems is to destroy anyone who causes them." He turned to face her fully. "Our dead deserved better than that. They died so we could stay human. If we became like you, their sacrifice meant nothing." The young thought about this for a long time. Finally, she bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect that her species had never shown to anyone. "I think I understand," she said quietly. "I think I finally understand." Nodded and turned back to the wall. The young left, but her question stayed with him. It was a question that would echo through history. The galaxy learned many lessons from humanity's war for freedom. They learned that humans were creative and determined, and absolutely terrifying when they needed to be. They learned that patience could be a weapon stronger than any fleet. They learned that the creatures from the small blue planet would never, ever stop fighting for their families. But the most important lesson was simpler. Humans would suffer almost anything. They would endure, adapt, and wait. But if you threatened their children, if you tried to break their spirit, if you made yourself their enemy, they would tear down empires to stop you. They had thought they were claiming slaves. They had believed humanity was just another weak species to be conquered and used. They never understood their mistake until it was far too late. They had awakened something ancient and dangerous, a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself, a species that knew war better than anyone in the galaxy. And when humanity finally had a common enemy worthy of their full attention, the stars themselves trembled. The Dominion fell, freedom rose in its place, and humanity remained exactly what it had always been: stubborn, creative, dangerous, and utterly, completely, beautifully human.